From dominating Congress to dispatching military deployments to American cities, President Trump has upended norms, constitutional law, and the bounds of traditional governance. But is his use of executive power and privilege truly unprecedented? It's a question my guest and three fellow scholars will examine at a presentation at Jacksonville University tomorrow night. We're joined now by Dr. Matthew Corrigan, professor of political science at Jacksonville University. Dr. Corrigan, thank you so much for being here.
It's great to be with you, Ann.
All right. First of all, what gave you the idea of having this discussion in the first place?
Well, I get this question a lot from students, from citizens. How did we get here? And is this different? And should we be concerned? And so I thought it was important to bring the knowledge that we have at JU to bear. We've got some kind of unusual and unique assets, and so we wanted to provide that for the public. And we've got somebody from the law school, Associate Dean Courtney Barclay. We've got somebody from our Public Policy Institute, the director, Rick Mullaney. And we have an expert in presidential norms, Dr. Collin Schumock, who will join us. And so we're going to tackle it from a lot of different perspectives. We're not trying to change people's minds on the president. I don't think your mind will be changed. But we want to give people good historical perspective and the best academic research.
Why does it matter if this is out of line with historical precedent? What would that mean?
Well, I think we are a country of laws and a constitution, but in many ways we are a country of norms as well. At the end of the day, our government only works if people follow the law. And so if you get to a point where you have political leaders not obeying the Constitution or not obeying the law, then you got a real problem. And, your first guest obviously showed us the importance of minding a republic and minding our democracy. And so, again, it's just so many people have these questions. We thought it was important to try to answer them.
So we talk about a country of norms, and I think it's fair to say that one of the norms has been presidents who've occasionally stepped out of the bounds of what we think of as traditional presidential power. And
Sure.
it goes back to Abraham Lincoln and certainly continued through the Obama administration in various forms, whether it's asserting, authority to do interventions abroad or to reclaim rights that are constitutionally given for a period,
Right.
whether it's internment camps, but, perhaps more egregiously with bombing Cambodia secretly, under the Nixon administration. There's a lot of examples.
Sure.
So how do you historically take into account what previous presidents have done and then try to create some sort of benchmark when we know that they haven't always hewed to the Constitution?
Sure. I think you have to go back to the founding and go back to the debates on the Constitution. Remember, the whole idea of the Constitution really came from the idea that we didn't have an effective national government. We were under the Articles of Confederation, and we didn't have an executive. And so the whole debate on the Constitution kind of revolved around those questions. And, what came out of that was really interesting. If you look at, the first three articles, Article 1, the Congress, very detailed about what Congress should be doing. If you look at the Article 2 of the President, it's not very detailed. It talks about the vesting clause, executive powers vested into the President. But there's not a lot of detail beyond that. And there's a reason for that, because I think the founders were really torn between revolting against a king just less than a decade before. And then, but also realizing we need some executive leadership. So I think they really didn't come to a real answer on the question. So in a lot of ways, Article 2, they punted the question. And we're dealing with some of the after effects of that now.
For people who aren't maybe thinking in these terms, can you just sort of remind us what a co-equal branch of government does and is? I mean, how does that balance out when you have an executive and you have these other branches that are presumably providing checks and balances, but how are they supposed to be functioning?
Yeah, the basics, go back to, Congress is supposed to make the law. And so that gives it tremendous power. And I think most scholars would argue that when the Constitution was written, Congress was the preeminent institution in our system. The executive is supposed to execute the law, and executing the law today is much different than executing the law in 1789, because, for example, being a commander in chief, well, that's very powerful. Well, in 1789, our army was 700 people, and our national government had about 3,000 employees. Today we have over 2 million, and so it's a much different scale. So the powers that were granted the president, I'm not sure the founders would really recognize our government today. And because it's such a big entity, the president's become much more powerful.
What particular actions under this nearly, well, just about 1 year old
Mhm.
administration, excuse me, have have are you focused on in terms of actions that were taken? Are there particular moments or particular decisions that you think highlight when people express concern about it, that highlight those concerns?
Sure. I think people have to uh, sort this out a little bit. Uh, you can ask, what can the president do and what should the president do? And you may not always agree with what the president should do, but if he's exercising his constitutional powers, he got elected, and he's won twice. And just on looking from the other side for a second, I think Democrats have to ask themselves, why did this controversial person win two elections? And why weren't we able to beat them? Because I think that's an important question as well. But when you look at some of the things that he's attempted, the immigration policy, for example, that becomes very problematic in execution. For example, President Obama actually has more deportations and removals during his first 2 years or first year than President Trump has in his second term. But the way he goes about doing it, most of those are at the border for President Obama. President Trump has, really gone into the interior of our country and started to remove people. And the way that that's being done, I think, gives people lots of pause that you have, ICE and other groups running around with masks on and things like that. And I think people, really kind of question some of our morality in terms of not necessarily somebody's individual case, whether they belong in the country or not, but the way we're treating people in, some of these detainment areas. And it's not really in our tradition. And so I think that concerns people. His ability really to use the military in a much more, I think, aggressive way than we've done recently, outside of probably President George W. Bush. But again, in most of those circumstances, he's probably on much more solid constitutional grounds, because basically, in terms of military authority, presidents can initiate military action. Congress is supposed to check military action, and the question is, will Congress do that in the future?
On the immigration issue,
Mhm.
I mean, there's some constitutional pressures that he's placed, whether it's through executive orders that have kind of overridden congressional action or challenging constitutional laws like birthright citizenship. But there's also this matter that has come up really in stark relief since the beginning of this year, just about dishonesty when it comes to officials in this administration, particularly as it has to do with these two people that were killed in Minneapolis, and whether the actions of those officers who killed those people were, whether they're, first of all, going to be held accountable, but second of all, whether the people that are their bosses essentially are telling the truth about what happened. And that seems like maybe a different, all administrations have been dishonest with people at some time. And we,
Sure.
Mentioned Nixon certainly is a strong example of that. But Bill Clinton, we weren't transparent in the Obama administration. I mean, this country wasn't transparent about the, drones that were,
Drones, right?
um, doing secret operations. So there's a kind of a rich history of dishonest leadership. Is this different?
Well, I think we can notice it a lot in a quicker fashion when it's on camera, and people are admitting things that will later be shown by somebody's cell phone camera not to be true. So I think that's problematic. So I think people have to take a deep breath before they start commenting in this administration, and I think that would be helpful. Um, I don't think it's new that administrations spin and try to put their idea of events forward, but I think kind of the blatant way this administration does is different.
Historically speaking, what are the administrations that you think have really moved the needle in terms of executive power? And we hear this term imperial presidency that started in the 60s. A lot of people have invoke that these days. But are there certain moments in history that you think really changed that balance of power between the three branches of government and led to more executive power?
Sure. Andrew Jackson, it's our city's named after. He's probably the best historical example, and when you compare someone to President Trump. And he railed against the Supreme Court. He used executive power in a very forceful manner. He didn't abide by what Congress says or did.
Can you remind us just of some of the actions that he took that demonstrate what you're talking about?
Yeah, there was a Supreme Court case that dealt with the state of Georgia, and the state of Georgia wanted to take land that had been given to some Native Americans, and the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Native Americans, and Jackson just said, "Well, we're not going to enforce that. I'm sorry," and that's when you get into a real problem. And so people have asked, a little bit with President Obama and drones, but more often with President Trump, when is it going too far? When are we truly in a constitutional crisis? And I'd argue in two ways. That's when we know if we were in a constitutional crisis. One is if the president just rejects what the Supreme Court says, if the Supreme Court is limiting his powers, just outright rejects it. Lots of people will take a decision and try to, massage it a little bit and do the best they can with it. But if he outwardly rejects it, that's I think a real sign. The second sign would be interference in elections, and that's why I'm very concerned about what happened in Georgia last week, where the FBI raided, I believe it was Fulton County's elections office. The states are in charge of elections, and they should stay in charge of elections. I don't think our founders obviously could anticipate, our current situation, but because of technology and so forth, it's probably a good thing that we don't have one national centralized elections office. They're spread out throughout the state. So interference in elections would be a very severe blow. And with President Trump, you just never know because he's very hard to predict. And he's even joked about running again, and of course he can't run again. So again, I think those words have to be measured and watched. But the bottom line really is that President Trump is going to do what President Trump wants to do. It's our system was designed for other parts of the government and the people to check power. And so Congress really has not done this at all. You're seeing some signs of it in the Senate now. But Speaker Johnson has almost gone completely with President Trump, even with matters like spending of money. I mean, that is a core power of Congress, and you really don't think Congress wants to give that away. And the Supreme Court, we'll see. The lower federal courts have ruled lots of times against this administration. The Supreme Court has not, and we'll see. Some important cases are coming up involving tariffs, involving birthright citizenship, involving the Federal Reserve. We'll see what happens there.
We talk about constitutional crisis. I sometimes hear that almost as if that's like the end in itself. But I mean, what happens in the event of a constitutional crisis? Like, what's next?
That's a great question. Because again, at the end of the day, we've got to be a country of laws, and if the Supreme Court rules on something, you don't like it. People understand that, but you still have to follow the law. The president's the same way. If he gets a ruling from the Supreme Court he doesn't like, he still needs to follow it. If at the end of the day he refuses to do that, there's really no enforcement mechanism to make him do that. I mean, the Supreme Court doesn't have an army, right? So it we abide by the law because we believe in the rule of law, and once that goes away, that's really dangerous turf. I don't anticipate the president doing that, but again, if we get to that point, that's when we've really got a problem.
If you're just joining us, I'm talking to political science professor Dr. Matthew Corrigan ahead of a panel discussion tomorrow night at Jacksonville University called President Trump and Executive Power, Too Far or Historical Artifact? So, Dr. Corrigan, you were alluding to some of the historical precedent. And other than Andrew Jackson, I want to ask you about 9/11 and sort of the changes that went into effect in terms of executive power after that. Can you just tell us how that changed things for the presidency in general?
Yeah, anytime there's a huge emergency, that usually means presidents are going to gain power. FDR obviously had to deal with the Depression and World War II. He gained huge power. Lincoln during the war, Civil War, gained a lot of power. So what 9/11 did, I think it did a couple things. One is it really made President Bush as commander in chief even more powerful because people were looking for protection. People were looking to make the country safe again. And so, a lot of that and power shifted toward the president, and even laws that passed in Congress probably wouldn't have passed in previous years without that circumstance. And so what that did is really put the executive not only as the military leader, but as the domestic protector. And once you start getting into domestic issues, that's a whole new, I think, area for government power and executive power.
And you mentioned FDR at that wartime
Mhm.
leadership. Obviously 9/11 was a huge inflection point in terms of Americans' sense of security. How relevant is fear? How motivating is fear when it comes to executive authority? How beneficial is fear to somebody that is looking to accrue power in the presidency?
It's huge because, again, in our system, the president, either by default or by design, ends up being the leader during times of crises. If you've got a military situation developing and quickly developing, people say, well, Congress has the power to declare war. Yeah, but we don't have time to get Congress together if we need to respond to something very quickly. And so both the courts and Congress through time have really given the president the power to defend the country and even to initiate military action without congressional authorization. What the War Powers Act did in 1973 is say, listen, if you commit troops, you then have to go to Congress and get permission to keep those troops there. And so at the end of all of this, because of circumstance, because our country's become so large, and because it's become so powerful, the executive of the country has become powerful. And so the question becomes, how far do we go?
And is there a road back? I mean, when these powers are asserted by any administration, do we revert? Are there correctives that come into place?
Sure, there's a road back, and a lot of people ask me this question. The best road back is the midterm elections. And in other words, if a message is sent, and if Congress, at least one house of Congress, changes party, that sends a big message to the president, and obviously he won't be able to accomplish as much as he would like to accomplish. And people said, I'm waiting on the courts, I'm waiting on Congress. It's really up to you in 2026. The presidents, people feel that they're gonna in many ways defy history and keep the House. Democrats are fired up about the midterm elections. If you feel that you need to do something, people who listen to this program probably already vote, but you need to get 5 of your friends to go out and vote, because that's what's going to send the ultimate message.
Does something like what happened in Fulton County give you concern about the reliability or the accuracy of the midterm elections?
Not as we stand now, but if that happens again and again, in other words, if the FBI or even, heaven forbid, the military comes to try to get ballots and inspect election offices, that's basically ending democracy. That's canceling democracy, and we can't do that. So I really think, with everything going on, this incident in Atlanta probably deserves more attention than it got.
Well, the event is tomorrow. It is at Jacksonville University's Gooding Auditorium. It'll feature my guest, Dr. Matthew Corrigan, also the director of the Haskell Institute of Public Policy, Rick Mullaney, Jacksonville University School of Law Associate Dean Courtney Barclay, and Collin Schumock, who's an assistant professor and lead research at the Public Policy Institute. There's a link on our website if you would like to attend. Dr. Corrigan, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.